building bridges. It is about the experience of both the host community and those arriving from the Caribbean in this country in the 50s and early 60s.
I wanted to just ask you where you were born.
In London, in between King's Cross and Euston Stations. You know, the hub of London, yeah. And I've remained here ever since. I don't think I could live anywhere else, actually. Although we changed so much, I don't think I could leave London. No. Because, it's even more versatile than it ever was, really. Yeah. So I've been born in London, and I think I'll die here. Definitely. But it has changed so much. And when the Empire Windrush brought the first immigrants, they were of a... Well, to be honest, in any country, whatever colour people are, you can tell class. And they all seemed, that got off that boat, sort of middle class, who wanted to come and help. And some of them, of course, were fellows who'd actually worked for the army, fought for the army and fought to keep him off our shores. So really, they were of a different standard. And they all got off and they were so happy. And I thought, the state we were in, we got craters all over the place and buildings down, and we've got to build it all up. We were still on rations till 1954, and this was 48. And I thought, what on earth do they think they're coming to? They were so happy to get there, I really wondered why they wanted to come.
It is one of the worst unemployment problems in the world.
What proportion of your people?
I would say it's chronic at about 20%.
Of the working population?
Of the working population, and tending to rise. Obviously, in those conditions, emigration is a very valuable outlet to us. But most avenues of emigration are closed.
Not, of course, Britain.
Britain is the only one that is open. And now that Britain has more than zero unemployment, Jamaicans who are very adventurous are coming to England in goodly numbers, currently at the rate of about 10,000 a year.
But anyway, they turned up, and England, all through my life, has always been a refuge for immigrants, and we've had them in series. Like we had the Cypriots when they had all the trouble in Cyprus, and we had the Italians, and we've had all that. And they all seem to take over a little part of London. They segregate in sort of areas. So we had the Italians in Camberwell, we had the Cypriots in Camden Town, you see, and the Irish in Kilburn. You see, we had all that. And then when they prosper, they move out. And this is how it goes on. So I suppose the old country is used to it. So when the Caribbeans came, they were new. And, it was colour as well. And all that. So I think we didn't know what to expect of them, and they didn't know what to expect of us, or they'd been told a yarn, because the way they were so happy to get here, and it was a mystery to me, sitting in the pictures thinking about it. And anyway, they came, and lots of them went over the river, and they landed, they seemed to collect in Brixton and Streatham and places like that. And they infiltrated into Camden. We saw them gradually, And for me, it wasn't unusual because my family had always been sort of open, and we did have foreign visitors, And of course, our stepmother was half Belgian. I could never understand the foreign part of her, but there she was. She was half, And so we were, I think, probably a little more open than usual run. But they came, and the country mandated that they should be housed. And of course, a bit of bother really, because youngsters couldn't get places, but these people were coming in and going straight into flats, and all that sort of business. But it all settled down in the end. And I honestly think that the Caribbeans being the first after the war, they're cemented now. But their children have been westernised. And I think that's sad. Because I don't think they belong in their own country, and they're not quite accepted here. You know what I mean? And I think it's hard for them. But I don't know what one can do about that, except that time will take care.
I do remember walking through Victoria Station at one time, and that probably was the 50s. And there on the station, and it was still cold weather, and we were still all quite rather dingy, second-hand clothes. I always wore my sister's clothes, or, nicely mended and so on. Even well-off people could have very mended clothes. There on the station were lots and lots of black people, so it couldn't have been the first lot, which I have been told were just men. They were wives and families, and they all had hats and gloves, and were dainty and clean and brightly dressed, and nothing like us dingy, downtrodden. It really rather, and we weren't well fed either. It was still rationing, and all of these beautiful people. I think it was Victoria Station. There they were, and that's just one memory I have.
I remember I used to get on the bus, and we had a chap it was the conductor, and every bus stop he had a little ditty, and it was quite unusual for us, They brought a lot of colour into poor old London, because we'd been bashed up, and we were pretty staid and fed up, really. We're still on blooming rations,
Row upon row of dirty, dismal houses that should have been pulled down and done away with long ago. Homes without any proper sanitation, where every drop of water has to be carried up and down the stairs in buckets. And the only place for the cooking stove is on the stairway landing. Homes where whole families live, eat and sleep all together in one room, and the children have nowhere but the back alleys to play in.
And so it was different. But I think sometimes there was a little bit of resentment.
There was a massive prejudice. Nobody thought, all these black people are driving our buses. It's rather like all the Polish people are painting the houses. Where would the decorators be and the plumbers if we didn't have poles around now? In those days, it was, the West Indians were driving the buses, doing the cleaning, all the jobs nobody else wanted to do.
I do think that of all the immigrants, that the Caribbeans now have been here so long and did so much to help at the beginning, because, let's face it, the fellas coming back from the war and what they'd been through, what we'd all been through. In the Blitz, 6 of my family were killed. And I know when I was working in a solicitor's office in Bishopsgate, and we had a chap came back, and his whole family lived in a great big house in the East End. And he came home and the whole family had gone. And poor Timber Woods was the only one left. So it really, it was a peculiar time emotionally and all this sort of thing. And they came at that time. And they worked on the buses, they worked in the hospitals, and all sorts of places. But these young fellas coming back had been through so much and all that they weren't satisfied to do those sort of jobs now. They wanted something better. What had they been out there for and all this? Regardless of the fact that some of the Caribbeans had done the same.
One thing I can remember my late mother telling me in the 50s, when she first remembered the Empire Windrush when it arrived at Southampton and everything. And she said, when they came here, it wasn't that they were wanted, it was that they were needed.
I was born in Gray's Inn Road in London, in the Royal Free Hospital.
In London?
I've lived in North London quite a bit. I lived in Hornsey till I was 5, and then I went to Muswell Hill and lived on a new estate that was up there till I was 15. Then we came back to Hornsey again. And then when I got married in 1948, I came to St John's Wood. That's where my husband came from. But other than that, I've lived around in several places because we could not get a place. In fact, I was 21 years before I actually got a place, and that was because the house I was in was being pulled down. That was 30 odd years ago, and that was all. So my boy was actually at university by the time I got a council place.
Wow.
But as for talking about people coming into town, into London, into country, I'm absolutely ignorant about it because I didn't even realise what was happening. People came and you just accepted them. They're just one of the people that arrived, and that was it. It was like us going abroad in a sense, although I never went abroad. But I mean, that's what it was like.
I'm over 70, and I've been in London for quite much of my life, at different places, bits outside. I went to an international school, so I was quite used to black faces, Brazilians, Egyptians, Africans, but which kind of African, I don't know. Indians, they were always princesses to me, and I always thought they were very rich and rode on elephants and, all of that, kind of romantic feeling. And these girls especially, it was a convent school and a boarding school, and they never stayed quite as long as white girls. White girls would start at 4 or 5 and stay on until they were 18. These girls passed through or came to learn English or something like that. But later on as a student, and then in Swiss Cottage, we had lots of different black people, but I was never aware of who were the Africans, who were the native-borns, or who were the Caribbeans. And then a little later on, when I went to places like Humphrey Littleton's jazz place, and I was taken to other places in Soho where there were Caribbean, music, then I began to see that there was quite a lot of snobbery between those three kinds of black people, that the Africans were very snooty about the Caribbeans, and the Caribbeans were snooty, and they were all snooty about each other, and so I kind of left it, but I was, quite, I suppose I was a bit of a, not a very well-digestive Marxist, and, we're all God's children, kind of, very wet type of politics. I didn't really know much. And then I went into my profession, and then I had my child, and then suddenly everyone lived here.
I was just heard from my aunts and uncles that there were black people living in certain areas. And I lived in an all-white community, and there were wasn't multiracial at all. It was the only people I ever saw were white people, and I would hear from my uncles and aunts that there were black people who'd moved into another area. And actually, one of my uncles was a dustman, and he used to go around Newham, what is now Newham, and he used to talk about the black people who were living there. And basically, the messages I was getting as a child was that aliens had arrived, and we didn't know where they'd come from. We didn't know why they were there, and we didn't know who they were. And so the message was, stay away, because these strange people have arrived, and we don't know why they've arrived, what they're doing here. And so that was pretty much what coloured a lot of, I think, my generation's views, because we weren't informed. We didn't know the countries they'd come from. I think we heard later that, they all come to work on London Transport. They all come to drive our buses. And we didn't know why, why they would do that. And so it was a bit of a no-go area, really. We were just, in one community, and we were told there was this other community that had arrived, and we didn't know why. And so we just took it as, okay, well, they're them and we're us, and just carry on. So, that was, I suppose, really how I grew up. And it wasn't until I was older and, got used to having more people from other countries around that, but as a child, you just heard about people. I don't remember ever seeing any, possibly did, but I didn't live in the area where they'd allegedly all moved to. They'd all moved to West Ham, apparently. But I lived in Leytonstone, which was a bit sort of upmarket in those days. And so one didn't hear about, and then you didn't see anything on television, there was nothing in the media. It was just all hearsay from what I remember. Now, what I heard from my uncles and my aunts as to what their views were. So, and they'd just come out of the war, and they were having a bit of a hard time, I think, as well. So, I mean, that's really all my memories of it, really. And it wasn't until later when I was, teaching. I actually went to live abroad, and I came back again. And then I went to teach at South Bank, and that was where I got more involved in the whole. A lot of 50% of the students at South Bank were black. A lot of them were black Caribbean, but an awful lot of them were black African, and there were huge tensions between them. And that was something that, as a lecturer, I had to deal with. And a lot of the second generation West Indians were, say, working for local councils and were very left-wing, and say students from Nigeria and places were very entrepreneurial and very right-wing. one lot wanted to make a lot of money, and another lot wanted to save the world or work in local government, and there were huge cultural clashes with them, and so that was interesting.
I'm just about a wartime baby, the Second World War, I should say. I was born in Kent in April 1945 when the war was just about over. But my late mother always told me she could remember the last flying bomb coming down on the day that I was born, very close to Farnborough in Kent. And we moved back into London in 1946, and I've lived basically in West Hampstead all my life. Since 1946 I've been associated with West Hampstead. Wonderful place, so many changes. I love it. I do remember a few stories that my late father told me that when we were talking in the 50s, in the middle 50s, late 50s, when more and more Afro-Caribbeans and West Indians were coming into the area, and I asked my father, are these the first ones you've seen? And he was telling me when he was in the Navy, prior to coming in the Second World War, that he remembered seeing some people in China, and he saw African people in China who were basically slaves who'd been taken to China and sold on there. But he said the first real free black person he met was during the war, when they rescued them off an American merchant ship that was sunk in the North Atlantic. And they were pulling them out of the sea, and they suddenly pulled this black man out. And they didn't know who he was or what he was. And, they got the captain down to come and say, look what we found, Captain. And the captain says, well, what is it? Because nobody on the ship had seen a black man before except my father. Because most of them had never been out of England. My father was in the Navy before the war, so he had travelled. So he told me about, the first experience that he had. And he didn't know anything about the Empire Windrush. It didn't mean too much of them. And there was really no television around in those days, so, everything was by word of mouth. But I think the first black girl I ever saw, or the black person, black girl, was at my primary school. And I was 7, so that would be 1952. And we had a special assembly. And these 2 black girls were introduced to the school. And we sat there open-mouthed. We'd never seen black children before. We didn't know what they were. Nobody was prepared for it. And they sat down with us, and we didn't know whether to touch them. We were frightened to touch them because nobody told us anything about them. The teachers, I don't think, knew too much about them either, and we said, well, can we play with them at break? Do we eat with them? What do they eat? Nobody told us anything because we used to get a little bottle of milk, and we weren't allowed to touch them or associate with them for a few months. And then we used to have school dances, and nobody would dance with these 2 girls. And I felt sorry for them, and in the end I went over and danced with one, and I remember her, and I think she was my first love. And I used to get wicked mockery from the other children at school.
I haven't had much contact except through the church. Going back to the 1970s, I think we had an elderly couple, but I never really got to know them very well. But there have been you can have people in church, but you don't really get to know them until you sort of work with them. You can be in the pews but not know them.
I think those of us who are a bit younger can only talk maybe of the past 20 years, when I think we've had members of the Indian community, the Chinese community, we've had West Indians, we've had East and West Africans, and this church is stronger for it, because they don't just bring themselves, they bring their traditions with them, their colour, but most important, they bring themselves, but their music, their hymn singing.
They're dancing.
Yeah, and when we have a function like we've had today, you've seen how many of these people we've had here, and we welcome anybody here at St Mary's, as most churches do now, and we're stronger for it. You know, we don't believe in turning anybody away. We welcome everybody to our church.
I'm Shamini. I'm going to ask you what kind of messages do you want to send to the children that are here today, or the young children?
The opportunities that are there for you today, education-wise, and going into business or whatever, the opportunities are there that your grandparents didn't have and never thought they would have when they first came here.
Stop worrying about your ethnic origins.
Yeah.
Yes. Stop thinking that my parents came from where it could be India or Trinidad or whatever. You're in the UK now. You've got to try and integrate. And I just get so angry with everybody. Oh, I'm black. This isn't going to happen. It will if you look outward. If you look inwards, it won't happen. But if you've got to look outwards, no good saying, I haven't got the opportunities at school. You have. All the kids go to the same school. They all go to the same comprehensive school. Some are privileged, have private education. They're the lucky ones. But, if you really want to get somewhere, like my friends, 4 kids, working class background, the parents were behind them, helped them, and they all went through university and they've all done well. Okay, it's one exception, but they aren't an exception. There are others like them.
Don't forget your background. I think it's really important to be proud. I've just, my daughter-in-law is studying this, and there are 2 Nobel Prize winners from Trinidad, which is a Caribbean country after all. There's Derek Walcott and there's Naipaul, and both of them were in their way immigrants, or they'd come somehow from elsewhere. But I think it's good to remember where you came from and to know your traditions and to be proud, to be really proud of it and not to be ignorant. I'm proud of some of my ancestors that go back an awful long time. They were Catholics and they fought Henry VIII, the Reformation. I'm not a churchgoer here. I'm a non-churchgoer now, actually. But I'm really pleased they remained Catholics right through the Reformation. They hid. We weren't allowed to go into Parliament. We weren't allowed to go to university. We had to go abroad. And, I'm proud of my background. I mean, it's interesting. I'm not they're not absolutely great or anything. But really, don't forget and, don't just become into a melting pot.
I live in a block now, council block, and I live with people from Africa, Ethiopians, Somalis, and Nigerians lately. Just about a fortnight ago, we had some Nigerians move in for the first time. But we've also got Caribbeans, we've got Indians. The whole place is a world of nationals. And we have to change our ways as well. They have to change theirs. I mean, I get in the lift. It's like the village street. And when I first got in, and a little family moved in, they had children, and nobody spoke in the lift at all. And I thought, well, this can't go on. So I thought, well, I don't know how to get round it. So when the kids came in and they started going to school, I'd get in at 4 o'clock and Mum had been to bring them home, on her own. And I'd say to the kids, been to school today? And some of them said yes, And what do you study? And they'd tell me. And do you like school? And one little boy said no, and all the others told me. And Mum kept quiet. But the next time I got in with them on the school run, Mum would talk as well, because I was interested in her kids. But when Dad got in, nobody would talk again. You see, so I thought, oh dear. So anyway, after a while, the men began to Well, they don't talk, but they nod their head in acknowledgement that you're there. And even, to my surprise, I was walking up Belsize Road one day, and somebody across the road, a Caribbean gentleman, went like that to me, and I thought, oh dear, they're coming round, they're thawing. But you see, it has to be on both sides.